Hey, my name's Noah Carter. I'm 32 and I fix electrical systems in commercial buildings across Chicago. It's not glamorous work, but I'm good at it. I find problems before they become disasters and I keep my head down while I do it. Most days, that's enough. That night, it was raining hard enough to make the streets shine under the streetlights. I had just finished checking a faulty panel in a building 2 blocks over. My jacket was damp, my hands smelled like metal and dust, and I didn't feel like going straight home to an empty apartment. So I stepped into the first bar I saw with decent lighting and an empty stool near the back. I told myself I'd stay 20 minutes, just long enough to warm up and drink something that wasn't from a vending machine. I was halfway through my coffee when I noticed her. She sat at a corner table, back straight, shoulders squared like she'd practiced the posture for years. Dark hair pulled into a clean knot, black vest over a white blouse. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not a bar on a rainy Tuesday. Across from her sat a man in his 50s, expensive watch, expensive smile, the kind of man who expected the room to adjust itself around him. He kept reaching across the table to touch her hand when he spoke. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Every time his fingers brushed hers, her shoulders tightened for half a second before she relaxed them again. I watched it happen 3 times in less than 10 minutes. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I spend my days reading systems that look fine until they aren't. The dangerous ones are usually the ones that still run smoothly on the surface. I tried to mind my own business. I checked my phone. My sister had texted earlier about Sunday dinner. Nothing important, just the usual reminder that I was expected to show up and pretend I had more of a life than I actually did. Still, something about the woman at the corner table stayed with me. The way she smiled without using her eyes. The way she kept checking the time on her phone like she was counting down to something. It wasn't fear exactly, it was exhaustion. The kind that comes from having to perform for too long. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Then the man leaned in again, closer this time, and I saw her jaw tighten. I put my phone down. I didn't have a plan. I just stood up, walked across the room, and stopped beside her table. I rested my hand on the back of her chair, close enough to look familiar but not touching her. "Been looking for you," I said. She looked up. For a second, her eyes were completely blank. Then something shifted. Relief. Small, but real. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut. The man across from her frowned. "And you are?" I kept my voice even. "Her boyfriend." It came out smoother than I expected. I've never been good at lying, but this one felt necessary. She didn't miss a beat. She pushed her chair back and stood, smoothing her vest like we really had somewhere to be. "I completely lost track of time," she said to the man. Her voice was calm, almost warm. The performance was flawless. We walked out together without another word. The rain hit us the moment we stepped outside, cold and heavy. She didn't complain. Neither did I. We just kept walking until we were half a block away, under the awning of a closed storefront. Only then did she stop. She let out a slow breath, and for the first time since I'd seen her, her shoulders dropped. The perfect posture disappeared. She looked smaller, softer, more human. "Thank you," she said quietly. I shrugged. "You looked like you needed an exit." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You do that often? Rescue strangers from bad dates?" "Not really. But you were good at it. You were better." We stood there for a while, listening to the rain hit the pavement. Neither of us moved to leave. It didn't feel like we needed to fill the silence with small talk or fake politeness. We were just two people who had accidentally crossed paths for 5 minutes, and were now standing in the rain like it was the most normal thing in the world. She glanced at me sideways. "You helped me without knowing anything about me." I thought about it for a second. I just figured if someone sees something wrong and walks away, they lose the right to complain when the world feels cold later. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, really looked, like she was trying to decide whether I was being honest or performing too. After a moment, something in her expression shifted. Not a smile. Something quieter. Before she turned to go, she said, Good luck with whatever you're trying to build. Then she walked away into the rain and I stood there longer than I should have, watching her disappear down the block. I didn't know her name. She didn't know mine. And I told myself that was fine. It was just one strange night in a city full of them. But on the walk home, her words kept circling in my head. Good luck with whatever you're trying to build. I wasn't building anything, not really. I fixed other people's systems and went home. That was it. Still, the way she said it made it sound like she thought I was capable of more. I didn't like how much that stayed with me. We stood under the awning for a while, neither of us in a rush to go anywhere. The rain was coming down harder now, hitting the sidewalk in thick sheets. Evelyn kept her arms crossed, not from the cold, but like she was still holding herself together out of habit. I could see the shift in her. The version of her that had been sitting in that bar was gone. This one looked tired in a way that didn't need to be hidden anymore. She let out a slow breath. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time. "Really?" I nodded. "You didn't seem like you wanted to be there." "I didn't." She glanced at me. "But I also didn't expect anyone to notice." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. I've never been good at filling silences with the right words. Most of the time, I just let them sit. She looked out at the rain. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Most people would have just minded their own business. "I tried," I admitted. "Didn't work." That earned me a small, genuine laugh. It was the first real sound I'd heard from her, not the polished one she used inside the bar. "You do that a lot?" she asked. "Step in when it's not your problem?" I thought about it. Not usually, but I don't like watching people pretend they're fine when they're not. She turned her head toward me. Her expression was hard to read, but there was something careful in it, like she was trying to figure out if I was being honest or if there was something else I wanted. "You could have just walked past," she said. "I could have." I shrugged. Didn't feel right. We stood there a little longer. The rain was loud enough that we didn't have to force conversation. After a minute, she spoke again. "You're not going to ask who he was?" I shook my head. "Not my business." She seemed surprised by that. Most people would have wanted the story. I didn't. I'd already seen enough. She studied me for a few seconds, then looked away again. "You're strange," she said, but there was no edge to it. It sounded more like an observation than an insult. "I've been told." Another small silence stretched between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, if anything. It felt easier than most conversations I had with people I actually knew. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. "You didn't even ask my name." "Figured if you wanted me to know, you would have said it." She smiled faintly at that. It didn't last long, but it was real. "I should go," she said eventually. But she didn't move right away. I nodded. "Yeah." Before she stepped out from under the awning, she looked at me one more time. Her eyes were clearer now, less guarded than they had been inside the bar. "You help people without knowing anything about them," she said. "Why?" I didn't have a rehearsed answer, so I gave her the truth. "Because if I see something wrong and I can do something about it, then it stops being none of my business. And if I keep walking away from things like that, I don't get to complain when the world feels cold later." She didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, rain falling behind her, looking at me like those words had landed somewhere she wasn't expecting. I couldn't tell if I'd said too much or exactly what she needed to hear. After a moment, she gave a small nod, not the polite kind. The kind that meant she actually heard me. "Good luck with whatever you're trying to build," she said. Then she stepped out into the rain and walked away without looking back. I didn't follow her. I didn't call out. I just stood there under the awning for another minute, watching the space where she'd been. On the walk home, her words stayed with me longer than they should have. I wasn't building anything. I went to work, fixed what needed fixing, and came home. That was the shape of my life. Simple, quiet, predictable. But the way she said it made it sound like she believed I was capable of more than that. I didn't even know her name. By the time I got back to my apartment, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I hung up my jacket, made something to eat I didn't really taste, and sat on the couch with the TV on, but the sound low. I kept thinking about the look on her face when she realized I wasn't going to ask for anything in return. No number, no explanation, no angle. And no, most people would have wanted something. I didn't. And for some reason, that seemed to matter to her. I went to bed later than usual. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way her shoulders had finally dropped once we were outside. Like she'd been holding her breath for hours and could finally let it out. I told myself it was just one night, a strange 5-minute interaction that didn't mean anything. Tomorrow I had a job interview at some logistics company I barely knew anything about. I needed to focus on that. Still, before I finally fell asleep, one thought kept circling. I hoped whoever she was, she made it home safe. And I hoped she didn't have to pretend she was fine quite so often. I showed up to the interview 15 minutes early. Force of habit. I don't like being late and I don't like rushing into places where I'm supposed to sell myself. Harper Dynamics was in a newer building near the river, all glass and clean lines. The kind of place that made my work boots feel too heavy on the polished floor. I gave my name at the front desk and sat in the waiting area. My resume was already in their system. I didn't expect much. These corporate tech companies usually had their own maintenance teams or contracted bigger firms. I was just here because the recruiter said they were expanding their in-house technical operations and wanted someone who actually understood systems instead of just managing them. I was checking the time on my phone when the glass door to the conference room opened. A woman stepped out. Same dark hair, same straight posture, same black vest. Though today it was paired with a tailored blazer instead of whatever she'd worn to the bar. She looked exactly like the version of her I'd seen sitting across from that man last night. Composed, controlled, untouchable. Then her eyes landed on me. 4 seconds, I counted them. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw the recognition hit. A flicker. Nothing dramatic, just enough for me to know she remembered. She recovered faster than I did. Noah Carter? She asked like she was confirming a name she already knew. Yeah. She nodded once, professional. Come in. I followed her into the room. There was no one else there. Just her, a tablet, and a folder with what I assumed was my resume. She closed the door behind us and gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. She didn't mention the bar, neither did I. We both knew what had happened. Bringing it up here would have made it worse for both of us. She opened the folder and glanced at it, though I got the feeling she'd already read everything before I walked in. You've been doing electrical systems work for 8 years, she said. Not a question. Mostly commercial buildings, some older infrastructure too. She nodded. We're expanding our operations team. A lot of our facilities still run on systems that weren't designed for the kind of scale we're moving toward. We need someone who can actually diagnose problems, instead of just calling vendors every time something blinks. I didn't try to oversell myself. I'm good at finding what's about to break before it does. She looked at me then. Really looked. Same way she had under the awning last night. That's harder to teach than most people think, she said. The interview went on from there. She didn't ask the usual list of prepared questions. No, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or, what's your greatest weakness? She asked about actual work. Old buildings, faulty panels, how I handled situations where the problem wasn't obvious on paper. Then, about 20 minutes in, she asked something that made the air in the room shift. If you see something clearly wrong, she said, but it's not technically your responsibility, what do? I didn't answer right away. I could feel her watching me, waiting to see if I'd give the safe answer or the real one. I went with the real one. If I see it, I said, and I'm in a position where I can do something about it, then it stops being none of my business. Walking past it just because it's not in my job description doesn't make it someone else's problem. It just makes me part of it. The room went quiet. I kept going because I figured I'd already stepped in it. And if I keep doing that, I don't get to act surprised when the same thing happens to me later, or to people around me. Evelyn didn't write anything down. She just sat there, fingers resting on the edge of the tablet. Her expression didn't give much away, but something in her eyes had changed. The same shift I'd seen last night when I told her I didn't like watching people pretend they were fine. She didn't ask any follow-up questions about it. She just moved on to the next topic like the moment hadn't happened. But I knew it had. The rest of the interview lasted another 30 minutes. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't cold either. It was just honest. She asked hard questions. I gave straight answers. Neither of us tried to perform. When it was over, she stood and offered her hand. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Carter." "Noah's fine." She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Noah." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm, but not performative. When I let go, she didn't immediately look away. I walked out of the building feeling strangely calm. I didn't know if I'd get the job. I didn't even know if I wanted it that badly. But I knew I hadn't lied in there. Not once. And for some reason, that mattered more than whether they called me back. A week later, I got the offer. Better pay, better hours, actual benefits for the first time in years. I accepted. On my first day, I kept expecting to run into her in the hallway. I didn't. Harper Dynamics was big enough that the CEO didn't walk past the operations floor every day. Still, every time I saw a woman in a dark blazer from the corner of my eye, I looked twice. We didn't speak for the first 2 weeks. Then, one Thursday, I stayed late to finish checking a recurring issue in the server room on the 4th floor. Most of the office had cleared out. I was on my way to the elevator when I saw her standing by the coffee machine in the break room, staring at it like she'd forgotten why she walked over. She looked up when she heard me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she gave a small nod. Not the CEO nod. The other one. The one from under the awning. I nodded back. She didn't ask how I was settling in. I didn't thank her for the job. We just stood there for a few seconds like two people who knew something about each other that no one else in the building did. Then the elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught her still watching me. I didn't know what any of this meant yet. I wasn't even sure I wanted to know. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever this was between us, it had already started the night I walked across that bar. And now we were both pretending it hadn't. I started the job on a Monday. The work was steady, the pay was better than anything I'd had in years, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just patching things together to get through the month. Harper Dynamics ran on systems that were newer than what I was used to, but the problems were still the same underneath. Things broke. People ignored the early signs. Someone had to pay attention before it turned into a bigger mess. I kept my head down. That was easy for me. For the first couple of weeks, I barely saw Evelyn. She was the CEO. I was in operations. Our paths didn't cross much unless there was a reason. When they did, it was always professional. A nod in the hallway. A brief acknowledgement during a meeting. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. Still, I noticed her. Not in the way people notice their boss. I noticed the way her shoulders stayed tight even when she smiled. The way she listened to people without ever fully relaxing. The same version of her I'd seen that night in the bar, just wearing better armor. One Thursday night, I stayed late to finish tracing a recurring fault in the backup power system on the 4th floor. Most of the lights were already off. The building felt quieter than usual. I was packing up my tools when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Evelyn appeared in the doorway of the small workspace I'd been using. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, one hand resting on the frame like she wasn't sure if she should come in or turn around. I straightened up. "Everything all right?" She looked at me for a second, then stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Not all the way, just enough that no one walking by would hear us. She sat down across from the desk without asking. For a while, neither of us spoke. She stared at her hands, then at the floor, then finally at me. "If you had known who I was that night," she said quietly, "would you still have done it?" I didn't answer right away. I could tell she wasn't asking to test me. She was asking because she genuinely didn't know. I thought about it, really thought about it. "Yeah," I said, "I would have." She studied my face like she was looking for the lie. There wasn't one. "Why?" she asked. "Because it wasn't about who you were. It was about what was happening, and I still would have thought it was wrong." Evelyn let out a slow breath. She leaned back in the chair, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked like she was too tired to keep her guard up. "Most people would have seen an opportunity," she said. CEO single, sitting alone with some man she clearly didn't want to be with. They would have tried to use it. I'm not most people. I know. She gave a small, tired smile. That's what scares me. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. She looked around the small room, then back at me. You don't try to impress me. You don't flirt. You don't even act like you want anything from me. I don't. Why not? I shrugged. Because I don't. She was quiet for a long time after that. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm used to people wanting something, even the ones who pretend they don't, especially the ones who pretend they don't. I'm not pretending. She nodded slowly, like she was starting to believe it. We didn't talk much after that. She stayed for another 10 minutes, mostly in silence. It wasn't awkward. It just felt like neither of us needed to fill the space with words that didn't matter. Before she left, she stood up and straightened her blazer out of habit. Thank you, she said, for answering honestly. I nodded. Anytime. She paused at the door. Most people lie when they think it'll get them somewhere. I don't see the point. She looked at me for another second, then gave a small nod and walked out. After that night, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but it was there. She started staying later on some evenings. Sometimes we'd end up in the same break room when the rest of the floor had gone home. We didn't talk about personal things at first, just work, systems, problems that needed solving. The conversations lasted longer than they needed to. One night, she asked me why I never tried to make myself seem more important than I was. I told her the truth. Because I'm not. I fix things. That's what I do. She didn't laugh or brush it off. She just looked at me like she was trying to understand how someone could be that straightforward and still mean it. Little by little, she started letting pieces of herself show when it was just the two of us. Not the CEO version. The one who got tired of always having to be the strongest person in the room. The one who sometimes wished she could disappear for a weekend without anyone needing her to make decisions. I didn't push. I didn't ask for more than she offered. I just listened. And for the first time since I started working there, I stopped feeling like I was just passing through someone else's world. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden shift, no dramatic moment where everything changed. What grew between Evelyn and me happened in the quiet spaces, in the small things that didn't need to be named. Over the next few months, we kept running into each other after most people had gone home. Sometimes it was by accident. Other times it felt less like chance. We would talk in the break room with 2 cups of coffee that had already gone cold. We would walk to the parking garage together without saying much. She would text me at 11 at night about a system issue she wanted a second opinion on, and I would answer because I knew she wasn't really asking about the system. She started letting me see the parts of her that didn't belong in boardrooms. The exhaustion. The way she sometimes doubted whether she was making the right calls. The quiet frustration of always having to be the steady one, the decisive one, the one who never cracked under pressure. She didn't say these things directly at first. She let them slip out in pieces, like she was testing whether I would use them against her. I never did. I didn't try to fix her. I didn't offer advice she didn't ask for. I just listened, the same way I listened to the buildings I worked on. You don't rush a problem. You pay attention until you understand what it actually needs. One evening in early spring, we were both leaving late again. The sky was still carrying the last bit of daylight. We walked side by side toward the street without planning to. When we reached the crosswalk, she stopped. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached over and took my hand. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't careful. Her fingers slid between mine right there on the sidewalk, with people passing by on both sides. No one important noticed. But for us, it felt like the loudest thing we had ever done. I didn't pull away. I didn't say anything clever. I just held on. We stood there until the light changed. After that, things stayed quiet between us, but the quiet felt different. Warmer. She would sometimes rest her hand on my arm when we were alone in the office. I would sometimes bring her coffee exactly the way she liked it without her having to ask. We still didn't put a name on whatever this was. We didn't need to. Naming it would have made it feel smaller than it was. One afternoon, I was waiting outside the building for a ride when she came out. The wind caught her hair as she stepped through the doors. She looked at me for a second, then walked over. She didn't smile right away. She just stood beside me and watched the street. "You know what's strange?" she said eventually. "What?" She glanced at me. "That night in the bar. You were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't fine. Everyone else saw what I wanted them to see. You didn't." I thought about that night. About the way she had been holding herself together so tightly it almost hurt to watch. "You were used to pretending," I said. "I think you got too good at it." Evelyn was quiet for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I don't have to do that with you." I looked at her. Really looked. The woman standing next to me wasn't the CEO anymore. Not in that moment. She was just someone who had spent too many years being strong for everyone else and was finally allowed to stop. "I know," I said. She reached for my hand again, right there on the sidewalk. This time, she didn't let go when the light changed. We didn't rush anything after that. We didn't announce anything. We didn't try to turn whatever this was into something that needed to be explained to other people. Some nights she came over and we sat on the couch without talking much. Some mornings I would find a message from her at 6 a.m. about nothing important, just because she wanted to say something to someone who wouldn't expect her to be perfect. I stopped feeling like I was watching life happen to other people. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing inside it. And Evelyn, for all the armor she had learned to wear, finally had a place where she could take it off. We didn't know what would happen next. We didn't need to. We had both spent enough time pretending. This, whatever it was, felt like the first honest thing either of us had let ourselves have in years.